Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Father Joe podcast. I'm Ken Calvert alongside Father Joe Grimaldi, and this is indeed the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. And you had a good day?
Very good day, and I'm very happy to be able to be here, too.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. Father Joe just got a haircut, and I said, "You got a good hair. You got a good haircut. You can't tell, but a nice haircut." And I'm going to share something with the audience because I think this is fabulous. You actually go to a place where priests get free haircuts.
They do, believe it or not. Well, if you have any common sense, you leave a nice tip for them. I mean,
well, of course,
you can't be rude about the whole thing.
You've been blessed with a good head of hair. I'll take some of that right now.
Thank you.
So that's, because sometimes people don't think priests are actually normal human beings.
Oh, yeah, they have to shower too.
They don't think you eat. They don't think you sleep. They just think that you say mass.
I meet people in the supermarket and they say, "Oh, do you do your own shopping as well?" Well, if I want to eat.
What do they think this is? The bells of St. Mary? You know what I mean? That you go back to this estate?
That's right.
Father, it's time for you to come in and eat now. Would you like a bit of pudding, sir?
Make sure we close the doors so
right.
you won't hear our conversation.
Father Joe Grimaldi is probably one of the most normal humans I've met in a long time. I went to physical therapy today in my constant search to repair this back that I injured, so many years ago. Somebody happened to bring up annulments. So it came up and I thought, wait a minute. That's a sign from God that today's podcast should be about annulment. So I know very little about it. I just know that it's somebody basically in the Catholic Church trying to basically dissolve their marriage.
Well, very often people call it the Catholic divorce, which it is not.
Okay.
There's a lot of misconceptions, starting with title itself, annulments. It's not really an annulment. Annulments do exist, annulments as such. But that would involve medical evaluation and so on and so forth, because it means that the marriage was never consummated. In an annulment, the proper name might be a declaration of invalidity. Somewhere along the line, whether people made a mistake on who to choose for marriage, or maybe they just think they fell in love with the individual, they married the wrong person, and they made a mistake, if you want. And I use that word in quotes. And they made a mistake for many reasons. Very often when a person reaches a certain age, parents will start saying, "Hey, what's wrong with you? How come you're not married yet? I want my grandchildren," and so on and so forth. You have that kind of a situation. People look at these people who've reached a certain age and they say, "This is the time you should be married, and what are you doing still single?" To make a long story short, there's a lot of misconceptions. So this declaration of invalidity is just too long a phrase to say, so they adopt, when I say they, the general public, adopt the title annulments. But there is such a thing as annulments, but that's not what the church goes through most of the time. There are times when an annulment is called for, which means that a marriage never took place. With the declaration of invalidity, the marriage took place. Let's say a mistake was made in choosing the proper person for marriage. I deal with a lot of young people who are looking forward to marriage. One of the big things I tell them right at the very beginning is make sure you look at each other very carefully, because what you see is what you get, and it doesn't get any better. And the reason I say that is very often we see this, that, or the other thing, and we'll say, well, once we're married, she's going to be quite different. Well, no, it ain't going to happen. I said, here's what happens before marriage. You want to impress. You don't do it consciously, but subconsciously you want to impress. Even people living together, you want to impress them. But once the marriage takes place, I hate to be crude, but it goes downhill if you want, because you don't have to impress anymore. You have to use both your mind and your heart. If you use only your mind in making a decision to marry, well, you're a robot. If you use only your heart, well, then you're an emotional slob. Huh? You need to use both in making a decision towards marriage. Dating, of course, here's one other thing before we get into the process of annulment. I think one of the things people get upset about is, why does the church forbid premarital sex? We know that it goes on. It probably went on in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. It's something that went on forever. But why does the church say no? Well, in its wisdom, the church says it's good to abstain from premarital sex, because when you are evaluating an individual for a possible spouse in your life, you're blinded by the sex in making a good decision. Now, people are human. They're going to fail at times. But if the order of the day is to automatically have a relationship which involves sex before marriage, I think there could be problems with that, because you don't really see what the other person is like. Again, when you choose someone, you look at that person and you look at that person's faults, but you also look at the person's good points, and you evaluate. Can I live with this other person with all of these faults and all of these good points for the rest of my life? If you can honestly say yes to that, that's fine. Very often, people have a romantic idea of what marriage is. They're really thinking about a wedding, not marriage. And so when they're preparing for marriage, their idea of preparing for marriage is that, what colors are we going to use for the reception? What music shall we have? How many tables? How many guests? His guests, her guests, and so on. Where is the wedding gown coming from? What about the ring? And the concentration on the preparation for marriage is really the wedding. And when you come down to it, I know this sounds a bit trite, but your wedding lasts 3 hours. And marriage is supposed to last a lifetime.
Exactly.
And so I think this is some of the mistakes that people make. So,
well, let me just stop you for a second.
Please.
So you've gone through the process. They've been counseled by you or a priest. They get married. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, because there usually is. Okay, so now we get on with our lives. First year, pretty good. Second year, okay. A couple of things are bothering me here and there about the spouse, okay? Third year, you realize, I've got some issues here. We have some genuine problems. End of the third year, you say, I've made a mistake. There's got to be a process in between the beauty of the marriage falling apart, and then the absolution of the marriage.
The marriage, yeah.
Okay. My timetable is this. Middle of the third year, one of those two people want out. They want an annulment. What do they do?
Hopefully they'll talk to somebody, okay? It's interesting that when we speak about annulments, only about a small percentage of people that really qualify even apply for an annulment. And that's the sad part of it. The others who apply, well, they're just hoping they could be remarried in the church somehow. But I think one of the things we have to be careful about is there are a lot of red flags that can be noticed before the marriage takes place. The most obvious one is, not only do your parents say no to this marriage, maybe not verbally, but they don't like the idea, but neither do your friends like the idea. You better look into this. If there are that many people who are saying this is not a good thing to do, it's not practical at this time for both of you, and so on and so forth, that's very often ignored. You see, one of the grounds for annulment is a lack of due discretion. And I it's a very important phrase, if you want, because when we look at buying a house, you want to have somebody come in and inspect, the property to see if it is truly suitable for a house
You
for
bet.
you.
Yep.
Well, due discretion is making sure that you've used both your mind and your heart to make a decision to marry an individual. And there are red flags that we have to be careful about. See, the church says what happens after the marriage is not part of the annulment process. Part of the annulment process is what happened before the marriage took place, because that's where those red flags are. And if you don't pay any attention to them, you're going to find yourself a loser. And I think this is a very serious matter.
Gotta stop you again. You can't depend too much on your parents' opinion, because sometimes parents, no one is going to be perfect.
I agree with you, but by the same token, if it's just your parents, and you might take that element seriously, okay, no one is going to be perfect. But if it involves your parents and your friends,
Right, I get that.
I think
Yeah.
it's important that you at least consider it. Now, some people are not even going to pay attention to that, and that's what happens. You hate to have people tell you later on, I told you so, I told
Yeah,
you so.
bet that, yeah.
And
yeah.
you could easily see that happening in some
course.
cases. So you have to be careful about that. But again, I can't say enough about using both the mind and the heart. Huh? And so what is the process? Well, if you're a Catholic and you are serious about being married within the church, and the reason for it is not just because it has a beautiful aisle and it looks like a picture card church. No, we don't pick the church for that reason.
Right.
We pick it because we want Jesus as part of the marriage. I always say a marriage includes three, Jesus and the two. Because let's face it, even in the best of marriages, you're going to have ups and downs. And when you have downs, who do you turn to? Usually, people will go to their best friend. Then, if they are Catholic, they might say, well, maybe I should see the parish priest. But most people don't even do that because, unfortunately, in so many cases today, the parish priest or the minister, depending on what their religion is sometimes the last one to find out. Very often the person who's looking for an annulment is looking for a priest to go to. He doesn't know anybody. If they were a true parishioner of a church, you would go to the pastor. And so you could talk with that parish priest and come to some sort of resolution on what to do. Most priests are very, very understanding and loving about it. And so when a person comes in, they're not going to say, well, I never see you in church. Most priests would not do that. What they would do is let's sit down and talk about it. Why is this happening? Can you tell me, how did the marriage go since the wedding? Has intimacy been strong? Intimacy, by the way, is another point I want to make. Intimacy is not necessarily sex. Sex is important in a marriage. If that fails, well, there could be a red flag there. If intimacy fails, definitely a red flag. Intimacy is when you marry, you are giving yourselves to each other totally. Totally. And this is what makes you one. So that you have this intimacy and understanding between the two of you regarding every aspect of your marriage, whether it be financial or whether it be temptations or any of these things. Once you're married and you truly love each other, you're going to be intimate. And intimate, I'm using that in a very broad way, not just the sexual aspect. The sexual aspect comes about when there is a good marriage, because sex is the way you express your love in the fullest possible way. And so that should happen because of the love between the two people. Sexual relations should be the culmination of the love that the two have for each other, right to the very end. And of course, the need for sexual interaction is much more important in the beginning than as the years wane, but it's still there for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's not something that disappears. But by the same token, it's not as strong as when your blood is boiling at the age of 25 or 35,
Right.
and so on. So these are things to be understood.
Intimacy later on in life, I think, can be as simple as sitting across from your partner in a restaurant, really enjoying your time together.
Or watching TV
It
together.
is sitting on a sofa watching a good movie.
Exactly.
I think that's fine.
Exactly.
Because you can say to your wife, honey, would you mind while you're up getting me another beverage? Or do we have any more popcorn?
Get your own.
But you say it very, I always say it very politely.
Well, the get your own is also lovingly.
Yeah, I know, that's right. And believe me, I've heard that a number of times as well. I think what most people think about when it comes to annulments, I think that they just want to be rid of the burden that they feel that they have as a result of having a failed marriage.
You say something very interesting there, because I had one occasion years ago where the person was not a Catholic and not interested in marrying a Catholic, but just for her own well-being. She wanted to go through the process simply for the reason that you just gave. They want to just understand why things failed and put that behind them. See, another problem I see, too, is children. I think it's a good thing for children. I don't mean that in itself is the problem. But what I see is this. When two people love each other, truly love each other, it flows into the children as well. They know a lot more than we think. They sense that there's a great deal of love between their parents. They know that even if there are arguments, there's still that love that goes way beyond the arguments. But they also are very sharp in noticing problems. When people do not love each other, no matter what facade you present to the kids know. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting thing in my mind, because we take the kids for granted. The other thing, too, is when a marriage has failed, it's sad to see somebody say, well, we're going to stick with it because of the kids. My God, everybody's going to be miserable. Not just the two, but the children themselves are going to be, going to be miserable as well. So to me, that's not a great idea just because of the kids.
That's very curious, because I would have thought the direct opposite in terms of the Catholic Church. Stay together for the kids, as opposed to...
Staying together if they love each other is fine. But staying together, hating each other along the way, that's not good for the kids. You're not doing anything for the kids.
Okay. I don't know why I find that surprising, but I do. But that's why I'm... Go ahead.
I think the reason why you find it surprising is that obviously the Catholic Church is pro-marriage.
Absolutely. That's exactly what.
They want the marriage to succeed, and the marriage should succeed. But if two people truly can't stand each other, hate each other, that's not a good thing for the kids to have to deal with on a daily basis, because that anger then flows into those kids themselves. If there were an easy solution to that, granted, then we'd say, yeah, let them be married. Now, I'm not saying that they should divorce and remarry immediately. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just speaking about the present situation. The marriage is not a good one if you have two people despising each other and then there are children involved. It's very harmful to those children.
Well, this has been part one of our podcast on annulment and the declaration of invalidity of marriage. Now, it may seem simple, but that's hardly the case. We've heard a lot so far. Father Joe is so good at breaking down our topics that we needed 2 parts. Part 2 is now posted as well, and as always, we hope you enjoy.
This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you have a question or a comment for the Father Joe Podcast, send it to fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's fatherjoepodcast@gmail.com. Follow Father Joe on Twitter @Father Joe Podcast. The Twitter address again is @Father Joe Podcast. Please subscribe to the Father Joe Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and soon on iHeartRadio. We also ask that you rate the podcast and feel free to leave a comment. And finally, if you have a friend that you think might enjoy the podcast, please pass it along. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and see you next time.